Welcome everybody to the Network Plumbing Working Group meeting for Thursday, April 23rd, 2020. Doug, it looks like you have the first item on the agenda. Also, while Doug's going, if anybody else has more agenda items, please add them to the document. I did put the agenda doc link into the Zoom chat. All right, up to you, Doug.
Okay, cool. I think it's Tomo, actually.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's all good. It's all good. Yep.
So let me talk about the network status for the pod annotation. So currently, the models or in the net spec, our specification contains this pod annotation, which indicates the interface information as the network status. And then at that time, we have the name, interface IPs, and the MAC and the DNS. At that time, I'm wondering that at that time we could not identify the which network attachment definition is used because there is no namespace. So let's imagine that the MAC VLAN 1 network attachment definition, two objects in the Kubernetes. I mean that the one is the namespace 1, and then the namespace 2. At that time, when the user is looking the network status and then the MAC VLAN 1, then user is pretty hard to identify which one is used. So I'm just thinking about maybe we may need to additional, of course this is optional stuff, but also the additional fields, the namespace, which indicates the which namespace of the network attachment definition is in. That's the currently I'm just thinking about. So I'd like to you to know any feedback or comments for that.
So yeah, looking at the specification we have, it might not be clear, but section 531 says that the name in the status annotation can contain a namespace reference as defined earlier in the document. So I think if we need to say what namespace it is, we could put in namespace 2/ in the name field if we want to. That's allowed by the spec.
So like the agenda document, the MAC VLAN conf1, maybe the adding the slash at the head and then adding the namespace.
Yes. Yep. Let me try to get a link to that section. Let's see if it'll let me. How do I actually get a? Oh, maybe. Nope. Yeah, section 531. I'll just copy it since I can't get a link right now. But what the heck is the problem with Google Docs here? Anyway, if you see that 531 that I pasted just below your example, it said the last sentence there, the name may contain a namespace reference as defined in section 411. Okay. And section 411, that basically defines the namespace reference here, which I'll paste into the doc too.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think this is covered already. Maybe it's just not very well implemented in a lot of, or in the implementations, but we should be able to put the / format there.
Okay.
It should work.
Gotcha.
So.
Cool, thank you.
Yep.
So I guess the question is, at least for the implementation, so is Multis going to start putting that in there now? And so is there do we need to, is something that's going to parse it need to know about that?
Yeah, that's a good point. And the spec says may, maybe we should change that to something like should or
At least on the Multis side, we have a good way to kind of, we already have like a planned change regarding the network status that I guess we've published or had in our meeting minutes for Multis, because we actually had a mistake where we had networks plural status. So we've actually been holding on to 2 fields. So I guess it would give people an opportunity on that change to change any like dependent stuff, just as a heads up for how we might handle it on the Multis side with that. But
Yeah, but on that, you're changing the name of the field, so you've deprecated one and moved to the next. This one, the name would stay the same. It's just the content now is going to have a namespace in front of it. I mean, I'm not sure who's parsing the name or how they're using that currently, but I was just curious if that was going to be an issue, just changing it. But
yeah, it's a good question. Another option is we could say that if the net attached def is in the same namespace, you should include the namespace reference, but when it is in a different namespace, you must. Or we could just say you must do it for everything.
I would lean towards a must, just because then there's no question about which one it is.
yeah.
Anybody else have thoughts on that?
I mean, it makes sense to just put it there all the time if you're going to do it.
Yeah, I think the original thought was that most of the net attached defs would be in the same namespace as the pod, and so you wouldn't really need it. But if we find that we're starting to use net attached defs in other namespaces quite a bit, then obviously it makes more sense. Well, what we could do is an action item to update the spec. Does anybody want to take that action item?
I'll take that one.
Okay. Okay, so Doug, you will propose a spec change to 531 to require namespace reference in the
You got it.
key. All right, thanks, Doug.
Okay. So from the implementation side, I'm going to work on that, to adding the namespace in the network status.
Okay, cool.
Thank you,
Thanks, Tom.
Tomo.
Yep.
All right, Adrian, InfiniBand.
So hi all. So basically this bullet is for the next step in programming InfiniBand GUID for InfiniBand IP over IP interfaces. So we managed to merge like in the CNI as the InfiniBand GUID as a standardized runtime config for CNIs to process. The PR764 is just a typo, so it will, like, the naming format will match the rest. And I've just proposed, like, the next step would be to update the multinet spec for us to be able to use it on secondary networks. Our main use case for that is like an SROV secondary network which like rides on top of InfiniBand. So for that, like I posted 2 issues. I understood like that the format here is to just open an issue and propose a Google Doc with the updates and, you know, get some feedbacks on that for the multinet spec. So I basically proposed 2 PRs. Like one of them is some cleanup on the Mac attribute for as runtime config, which basically removes the IP over IP parts. And the second one is adding the InfiniBand GUID runtime config. And of course, then the next step would be the implementation, which I'm working on as we speak, actually. So, so just inputs from people here like would be great. Like just I wanted to introduce the feature here and see how we can progress. So Dan, you said naming question.
Yeah, so the convention upstream in CNI conventions changed a little bit from the naming in the document. The Google Doc that you referenced there. Let me actually put a direct link to that doc in the agenda here. Then we won't have to go through all of the GitHub issues. But excuse me. Yeah, so it changed from what you have in the Google Doc.
Right. So it's not updated. Yeah. So
okay. And then we
so,
also don't have other examples of status annotations that use an underscore. There are ones that use a dash. So I guess for consistency, I would suggest a dash for InfiniBand GUID. I'm willing to entertain other thoughts. The options we have are basically a dash, or we could try to do capitalization in the middle. We could try to do like the normal Golang JSON key style format or whatever, where it's InfiniBand all lowercase and then GUID uppercase. But even that would be inconsistent with what we currently have in our spec. So I guess my suggestion would be a dash instead of an underscore. Any other thoughts on that?
So today there's no camel casing, right, in the spec?
No, there's no camel casing in the spec. Yeah, all of our keys are either one word. There's only one item that is not one word, and that is default route, and that uses a dash. So whether or not that naming was correct, that's what we currently have. So consistency might be the better option here.
Yeah, sure. So I will no worries. Like I'll update this with a dash. Yeah, that's fine with me. Yeah. So.
Okay. I mean, I both of the changes looked good to me. Other than that, I might, if I'll take a look at them again. I might have a little suggestion here or there, but I think they looked mainly.
So I think like you can drop off comments in the doc itself, right? So.
Yep.
Yeah. So.
Although, let's see. Let me just make sure I can do that. No, at least it's not open to me. Would you mind opening it up to general comment access? I don't think you need to do everybody gets edit, but at least view and comment.
All right. Okay. So I will.
Yeah, and then we could continue the conversation in the doc. But I think next time or next meeting we have, given that these are pretty close, I think we should probably do a formal vote on these amendments to the spec.
Sounds good. So I will basically open it for, yeah, I see now that it's just for viewing. I will open it for everybody to comment. No worries.
Okay.
My mistake there.
Thanks.
Thank you.
All right, Tomo. You're up with Mac VLAN.
So this is the demo stuff. So if the Adrian M is here, go ahead first.
Oh, which Adrian? Me or somebody? There's another Adrian. Yeah.
Adrian M, device identification in network status annotation, BDPA.
Thanks, Tomo. Yeah, I added this item because I wanted to ask.
Can you get closer to your mic? I can barely hear you. I mean, you're clear. It's just soft. Or check your gain.
Yeah. How about now?
Better.
Better?
It feels like you're far away from your mic.
Oh, sorry about that.
Is he using the wrong microphone?
How about now?
No.
Worse.
Yeah, you had too much static.
Is it better now?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, sorry.
Sorry to interrupt.
Thanks. Well, I wanted to ask, maybe it's a stupid question, so apologize if it is very simple or if it's not the correct forum. But I came through this document about a device identification in the network status. I think it was discussed in the previous meeting. I have the link here that I can.
Yeah, we've discussed it a couple of times. In the agenda doc, there are some
Okay.
notes on those discussions. Yep.
Yeah, I think Jan from Ericsson proposed it on the 26th, and then I
Yeah.
followed up with some just background information last meeting on how it worked today.
Right. Well, regarding that document, I wanted to ask because well, I'm working on the VDPA support, and we are currently working on adding VDPA device support to the device plugin, and that means that the device plugin would now be able to add or allocate vhost sockets. So looking at the proposal, I see that the proposal is to add that kind of device identification in the network status, but as far as I know, that would be written by the CNI, not the device plugin, and I don't know if there is a way of getting that information to the CNI, or if it would have to be in a separate annotation object, or if it would have to be a completely independent thing. And if that's the case, then how how it would be handled by the CNI?
Can you describe the flow for VDPA and how it might be different from the existing mechanisms, like the Open vSwitch based stuff that Billy described last time, and what vhost?
Okay, so the flow is the device plugin basically probes the either the kernel or the kernel framework or the device itself, and probes the existence of the presence of the VDPA DPDK framework, and it allocates using any of those mechanisms, using either the kernel or a DPDK daemon. It allocates a socket, a vhost socket. Now that vhost socket it could be either a Unix socket, in which case it can either be running in server mode or in client mode. And if we're using the kernel, then it's not a socket, it's a chart device. So
Okay, so in the DPDK framework case, it is a Unix socket, but if it's kernel, it's the char device?
yes, it's the
Okay.
vhost char device.
Got it.
So that information, as it flows along through Multus to the CNI, as far as I know, the CNI will receive the ID, the device ID, which is the PCI address.
Okay, so the device plugin will set that socket up. Let me back up for a second. Where does it put that socket?
That socket is, it lives in a path that gets mounted to the container through the mount specification that the device plugin returns. So in the simple cases, you create the socket, you have a DPDK daemon listening on that socket, and then you mount that directory into the container. So the container is just can just access that socket.
Okay. Is that able to be the path? Okay, the path on the host doesn't really matter, right? Because it could be mounted anywhere into the container based on the mount points.
Yes.
Okay. All right. For the kernel character device, is that consumed by the device plugin and then a vhost socket is created from that? Or does that kernel, the char device, just get somehow stuck into the container as well?
The char device gets added to the container through the device specification that the device plugin returns in the allocate call.
How does that show up in the container itself?
It shows up like a char device. So it's under /def vhost something.
Okay. All right. Sorry, these are all questions that I and others sort of had last time and the time before, and would inform any kind of specification or solution that this group might develop. So that's why I'm trying to drill down a little bit further into it and get all the detail into our agenda docs so that we don't forget about it.
Yeah, absolutely. There is a public document about this. Let me paste it
yeah,
here.
if you have that link, that would be great.
Yeah.
And I can add that to the doc as well for more detail. Great.
There it is. So since we wanted to give consistency for all the possible VDPA implementations. So that's why it makes sense for the device plugin to handle them because on the kernel case, it is a device. That's why the way that information, for example, in the case of DPDK, we would expose a socket file to the container. Now I know that the userland or user space CNI already does that, and it already exposes that information inside the network status annotation. So my question here is, does it make sense for this information to flow all the way through Multus to get into the same annotation?
So a quick clarification there. So the user space is doing it in some private, non-standard way. It is not through the network status. At least how the socket, like the socket location and stuff like that, is passed up, and so it's all in like a user space specified annotation. It's not in there today. It's not in the network status today. Now that the document you referred to, it was trying to figure out a way to put it in. So
yeah, right.
Yeah.
So
and that's why I'm quite interested in this flow to figure out what might be different about the control flow here than the other cases that were proposed in that document.
Right.
And then based on a combination of all those, maybe we can get to a better solution.
Yeah, because I think when I talked last week, I mentioned it, but it wasn't highlighted that we were talking about moving some of this to the device plugin, and I wasn't sure how that was going to affect that document. But
Right. Well, jumping back a second, so once the device plugin does all the mounting and such, what were the next steps there?
Well, the next steps would be for DPDK, you would usually use VDPA with a user space driver, so with DPDK application. So the CNI usually would not have much to do.
Okay.
Because you wouldn't put a netdef driver on any of these devices because they're already exposing a user a vhost interface.
So the question is, how does the application inside the container or whatever figure out where the socket is that it needs to use with DPDK? And then if there are multiple networks that are attached to this container, how does it know which of those sockets is for which network?
Right. Yeah, that is exactly the issue.
Right, and there are some minor additional fields like client server, how many queues, that sort of thing. So you need the socket location and a handful of like configuration attributes to make this thing usable.
Okay.
So right now, I mean, we could overload the current environment variable that the device plugin uses. The device plugin currently adds an environment variable with the PCI address. That PCI address has no use on VDPA because there is no such device, and the application won't have access to that device. So we could reduce that, but it looks like it doesn't look like a coherent interface. We could also have the device plugin add annotations to the pod. So that's another option.
Yeah, something we discussed last time was that because most of this is basically control flow on exactly the same node as it will be consumed, at least I thought it was a little odd to do round trips to the Kube API because then that requires that the application inside the pod also do round trips to the Kube API to figure out what those annotations are, and that requires Kube permissions, RBAC, a Kube config inside the container, which it might have, but it might.
Well,
also not
actually,
have, right?
I think we talked that at least with the downward API that Kubernetes provides, the annotations are provided just in a file.
Oh, right. Sorry, yes, I did forget about that.
You are correct from whoever is going to fill in the annotations, whether it's the device plugin or the CNI, which we're leaning towards device plugin, would need those permissions. But within the container, we can get away without doing that.
Okay, fair enough. Is the environment variable name standardized in the device plugin spec?
I don't know if there is. I mean, it's not standardized in the API specification in Kubelet. The current implementation of the SRIOV network device plugin, on that implementation, the key, so the name of the variable is the resource name.
Well, it's
Or
like
it
PCI
says
underscore
PCI.
device underscore like name or something, right?
Yes, it's PCI address underscore the resource name, and the value of this variable is the PCI address.
Okay.
Is that in the spec? I thought wasn't there something recently or I may remember like 2 or 3 months ago to try to standardize on that, or was it always in the spec?
I don't know.
I was kind of asking maybe a Dan or a Tomo or Doug, because I feel like that came up recently that we did it a certain way, but it wasn't in the spec, so we were going to add it to the spec.
To which spec? You mean the plumbing spec or a different spec?
Yeah.
Oh, I mean, we have talked about device ID in other contexts, but yeah, I think that was like a meeting or two back, and it was somewhat related. But I think that was more about implementations in CNI, because something like the host device plugin or SRIOV could consume that as part of their CNI configuration.
Yeah, so here's what I'm thinking. If in the agenda document, October 10th, 2019, from actually you, device ID, Multis has an option to pass device ID obtained with the device plugin down to the CNI. Should we formalize it into the spec?
Yeah, there's also CNI Poll 448, and we talked about it as well on March 12th.
Anyway, that's when you asked, was it standardized? I think that's what I had in my mind. I was wondering if that's what you were talking about, and if that needed to be standardized or if it's not.
Yeah, I think where that came from was that we were looking.
And I don't want to digress or take us down a rat hole. I was just trying to, with your question, is it standardized? Right. I think I was trying to answer it.
Well, I think it is relevant because what currently happens is Multis. So in my understanding, and somebody please correct me if I'm wrong, because I haven't worked here in this area. I've just looked at the implementation for like 10 minutes. In my understanding, what happens is that the device plugin allocates, let's use SRIOV, for example. Device plugin allocates those virtual functions and then returns some information to kubelet. And then Multis, the Multis implementation, talks to the kubelet API on the local machine to get the resource map. And then it somehow does a mapping between the device plugin created interfaces and networks that are defined. And then it inserts device ID into the configuration that it passes down to various plugins when it calls those additional networks. Is that
that sounds generally right to me. Right. At least it's like I am somewhat familiar with the kubelet client in Multis, although I don't have to touch it often, but that sounds generally correct to me, Dan.
Okay, thanks, Doug. Yeah, so that is relevant here because that's one way to pass the device information around. And yeah, we had talked about trying to standardize that, whether that was a PCI address or something, because right now I think that particular key is Multis specific. And so maybe it is worthwhile to standardize that key in the spec so that other implementations could use it, or, you know, that we have some reference point for it. Right. But that only affects SRIOV plugin and wouldn't be reflected inside the container at all. But I don't think it makes a ton of sense to have like 5 different definitions of, you know, what is a device ID lying around, because, well, that doesn't make a lot of sense to me, as long as it, you know, can be used for the same sorts of things. So, I mean, I think with respect to this, the next steps would be does it make sense to use annotations given that those are just stuck in the container, I mean, does the device plugin or do most device plugin implementations already have Cube client capabilities and RBAC permissions and stuff to talk to the Cube API?
Right.
Is-
That's the piece that I don't quite know. Is that like non-standard or is that a typical way to do stuff?
I don't know about whether it's typical. I just checked that the device plugin API does allow the device plugins to set annotations, so you wouldn't need a I don't know if I understood correctly, but the device plugin wouldn't need to interact with Kubelet through the API.
Okay.
Kubelet, the current device plugin API contains a annotations field that is returned by the device plugin on the allocate call. So that's why I thought about annotations in the first place, because it looked like it was already being considered
Okay.
on the API.
Yeah. So, and Kubelet takes those annotations and adds them to the pod. Is that right?
Well,
I
I
guess what
haven't checked, like tested. Currently, the device plugin ignores that. And I mean, currently the SRIOV device plugin does not return anything on that field. But I would guess that that is the case. Yes.
Okay. Because that, I guess we should make sure that whatever annotations it does return from allocate would then get added to the pod itself. Because if, I mean, like you said, I'm assuming that happens, but we should double check that because there are a bunch of different annotation things running around in various places in Kubelet.
Okay. Yes, I can double check and update the document or.
Okay. Let me record that in the meeting minutes. So in this case, what kinds of things might a device plugin actually set for annotations? Because the problem that we've always had is that the device plugin isn't aware of network attachment definitions when it's doing the allocations. So it's just going off and allocating a couple of things, one per network, but it doesn't know which networks those really match up to. And then it is kind of up to the implementation, like Multis or something else, to figure out what the devices are that were allocated and somehow match those up with a given net attached def. So that's the next big question I think I have for anybody who's worked in this space. I don't know if we've answered that question yet, if there's a better way than Multis just randomly picking a device and assigning it net 0 and doing something else like that. But I mean, is the device plugin able to add some kind of annotation that
Yeah, that is a very good question, and I'm you know, I know the CNI had all that information, so I could, when I was doing all the user space CNI POC, I just had the information there in the net attached definition. But
right.
But you're right. I'm not sure the device plugin has that. And I think in my head, I was just assuming that it did. But you're right. I don't think it does have all that information that it needs. The only thing it really has is what's in the config map that tells it how to choose a device.
Yeah, right.
Doug or Tomo or somebody that in the Multis side, how does Multis currently do the matching based on whatever is set in the kubelet resource map?
I would have to look that one up, to be honest.
Okay.
I think you defined the resource name in the network CRD. right?
So as far as I remembered, the kubelet endpoint, the Maltus get the device side information from the kubelet endpoint. Kubelet endpoint, I think. Previously we using the checkpoint, but for now we using the kubelet endpoint for that.
Yes, I mean, today it's using the endpoint, but the question is, it's getting the device IDs, but how does it then do a mapping if you've got multiple networks? And it might be just as simple as this, like the order, you know, the device ID with the lowest number gets the, I don't remember. I was digging through some of Zhongwei's slides. I will post it. This was Zhongwei's, and so I'm not sure if it's open to the public or if it's a red hat. Well, I better hold off. I'm not sure what.
So it looks like Multis currently, or at least what it gets out of kubelet is an index and a string of device IDs. Does that sound familiar? And then how does it map? So custom resource. So it gets a net attached def. It looks for the resource name annotation on the net attached def, which I guess is not a standard thing right now. And then it looks that resource name up in the resource map. And if it finds that item in the resource map, it gets the device ID out of the map with a specific index. Okay, well, okay, so it looks like the tie currently between those two things is that the resource name from the returned resource map, you can annotate a network attachment definition with the resource name, and that is the tie between the network attachment definition and the resource map that it gets out of kubelet. So the device plugin, I guess, would have to know information about what the resource name is, and then Multis matches up the devices based on resource name. Does that sound familiar? I mean, that's like the 30-second look in the code.
Yeah, so that sounds right, at least from the device plugin point of view.
Okay.
The device plugin defines the resources, or
right?
The configuration.
Yeah, the config map. Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Okay. So it in this case, like the cluster administrator or the person defining the network attachment definitions just has to know more or less what that name is going to be.
Yeah, it needs to specify the resource name in the network attachment definition.
Right.
And then in the pod itself, somehow the resource needs to be injected there, right? So either through some pod admission hook, or just specify the resource request in the pod itself as well.
Okay. All right, let me record that. Okay, so, all right, I guess that clarifies that question. Where does that leave us? Do we want to try to answer the other outstanding questions here? We've got a question of, Adrian, you were going to double check that the annotations returned from device plugin are actually added to a pod object in the Kube API. And then we also have the question of multiple networks. How does the application inside the container know which socket is for which network? And then if we answer those questions, does that give us enough information to keep working further through this next time?
Yeah, I think that would be good.
All right, I just want to save a little bit of time for Tomo here, and we got about
Right.
10 minutes left in the call. So
And I think that's good. Yeah.
Okay.
Is there anything else that we need? Because like I think I asked this last time. Like Jan made the proposal like a month ago, but I'm not sure where that stands. Is still.
Yeah, I think at least I've gotten a lot more color around this and answered some of the questions that I had that were perhaps blockers in my mind for standardizing annotation names. So at least I think I've made some progress in my thoughts around it.
Yeah.
Let's do another round next week with these questions and
Okay.
maybe spend another 20, 30 minutes on it.
Yeah, and I know I did a lot of that original work on the user space CNI, but I do think a lot of this stuff will need to move to the device plugin a lot because of the mounting of the socket file or the char device into the container. So I do think it makes sense to move some of that. So now it's a question of how does that information get passed around, and how does this additional config that maybe the device plugin doesn't know about get pushed in?
Okay. Yeah, I have a couple of thoughts on paths and stuff like that. That I guess I can discuss next week and do a little bit of research in the interim.
Okay. If there's anything that comes up like between now and the next meeting, feel free to ping me. I'll be glad to do whatever I can there.
Okay. All right. Thanks, everybody. And if you have further thoughts, we can either discuss them on the Plumbing Network Google Group mailing list, or you can drop them in the agenda doc and we can discuss them next week. All right, over to Tomo for his demo.
Yep. Yeah, I try to share my desktop, but so the host disabled participant screen sharing. So could you allow it?
Yeah. Let me see if I can figure out how to do that. How does one do that? Hang on. I have a security button here. All right, I think you can do it now. Try.
Okay, got it. So
Perfect.
can you see the terminal? Okay. So let me click the stuff. Let me update my progress on that. So here is the Kubernetes cluster, kube control get node. There is the one worker node and the one master. And then currently the kube, and then the kube control get CLD MacBelan OYAML. So I created the MacBelan network policy object CLD for this purpose. Then this is the same as the usual Kubernetes network policy, but there are different scopes. Then I create a different CLD for that. And then kube control create F sample pod. So sample pod is I create the two MacBelan interface. One is the CentOS, and then another is the Nginx stuff. And then both using the different IP address, but also the same interface, MacBelan stuff. Like the MacBelan conf1 using the MacBelan interface, MacBelan conf2 using as well. Then let's see, get bot. Okay, I got it. Kube control, deck, IT, CentOS, bash. IT, Nginx, bash. Here we go. So here is no net kube control get MacBelan. So currently I don't have any policy yet. So currently from the client side, I'm the left terminal to get the Nginx contents here. And then the IP tables, the SAFE, we can see the no IP tables other than the MAC VLAN ingress and egress. So currently this both chain is pretty empty. So this is just to go through. Then the sample policy. Here is the policy. So I mix the slightly complicated rule. One is the ingress, filtering the CentOS and test default, the namespace selector. And then the port 80 is only accepted, of course. And then for the egress side, I using the local port. So the destination, the TCP port is allowed 180 or 281. Then let's create if sample policy. Then what's happened that IP table save. In the Nginx side of the IP table, we have lots of the IP table rules to filtering this stuff. So currently, without any option at that time, there is no response because this IP table works to drop the packet. And then, of course, with the local port 180, then we can get it. So currently the ingress and the egress parameter is supported as the usual Kubernetes network policy does. So and then so that's the current status. And then this code is pretty just finished at the last Friday or stuff. So it's pretty immature. And of course there is no README file. So I'm going to add the README file and then let you know the pointer for a GitHub repository. That's it.
Can you show your the stuff from the policy rules you created again? The IP tables.
Okay. Let me try to share. Here it is.
Okay. Thanks.
Yep. So I created several chain for processing ingress and egress and the ports and the from. So that's about it from my side. So feel free to comment and the feedback after the meeting by the Slack channel or anywhere. That's it.
Thanks, Tomo. And that's the nice font size. I could actually read that. There's not many demos that you can actually read what's going on. Thank you.
All right. Any other questions for Tomo?
Tomo, could you add to the agenda doc or somewhere once you have a GitHub for it?
Yes, sure, of course. So and then if possible, I'm going to add this repository into the Kubernetes networking prompting working group repository.
Great.
All right. Thanks. We got 2 minutes left. Anybody else have anything they want to talk about for the last 2 minutes? All right. If not, see, we have a couple of agenda or action items. First one is let's see here. Doug will propose a spec change to clarify the requirements around namespace. Addition to the net attached def status annotation network name. And Adrian C will update the InfiniBand GUID proposal with the naming change, and let's see, we'll answer some questions around VDPA and device plugin and discuss next week. And I think that's it. Anything I forgot?
Sounds nice.
Okay. All right.
good.
Thanks,
Thank
everybody.
Sure.
See you in 2 weeks.
Yep. Thanks, guys.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.
Bye.